On today's Locked On Jayhawks, did Kansas get their version of Travis Hunter, the in-state Kansas version with J.J. Dunnigan? We're going to break that down in the KU football transfer portal recap to this point of what they've added on the offensive and defensive side of the ball.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every show, and thank you for being a part of the action. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition, we're talking some KU football. J.J. Dunnigan, big-time in-state prospect committed to KU over this past weekend, and wanted to get into that, the importance of it, what it means in-state, and possible two-way player. You don't see those happen very often for KU football, or for, I guess KU actually has a decent amount, which we'll get into, but also a KU football transfer portal recap to this point. Things seem to be slowing down, and doesn't seem like they're done, but let's recap everything they've added on the offensive and defensive side of the football to this point. Before we get into any of that, this episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time, where you can get tickets to whatever you're looking to go to right now. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. All right, so Kansas lands J.J. Dunnigan. He is listed as a corner, I think, on some places, but it seems like going to be a safety for KU down the road. But according to his interview, he committed to Kansas during the Under Armour All-American game, which allows underclassmen to perform. He is part of the class of 2026. Sounds like he's going to be a two-way player, is kind of what he was saying, that he'll be a receiver and a safety for KU. 6'2", 185 pounds. The fact that he's listed by some as a corner shows you that if he is a safety, going to be a good coverage safety as well. And obviously a freak athlete to be able to do that. He's obviously, I kind of teased some of the Travis Hunter stuff. I don't mean to say that he's like, Travis Hunter was the number one recruit in the country, right? He's just this freak athlete. I don't mean to say that it's going to be necessarily that, but in the same vein of being a two-way player, in the same vein of being, you know, what I think probably closer to what Aqib Talib and Charles Gordon were, where they were full-time defensive starters for KU, who also rotated in for certain packages on the offensive side of the football that could, you know, make some offensive plays. That's what we typically seen from two-way players, right? When you think back to Charles Woodson, when you think back to like Jaleel Peppers, whatever it was for Michigan, it's guys who, okay, they're playing in a few packages. Maybe they're getting 5-10 snaps on the offensive side of the ball each game. But they're mainly playing on the defense side. That's probably more apt, but Travis Hunter is the most recent example of it, and you just won a Heisman, so let's go with it. It sounds more fun. It sounds more flashy, but he's rated as a 3-star prospect with an 88 grade on 24/7 Sports. To begin with, that's very good. I mean, that's close to being a 4-star recruit. On the composite, he comes in as the number 44 corner nationally. He comes in as the number 6 prospect in the state of Kansas. That's all part of the class of 2026, so it's not going to be this upcoming class. It'll be the class after. It's part of the top 600 national rankings on the 24/7 Sports composite. But even all of those, which are already good to begin with, are not necessarily doing it justice. So it sounds as if he is going to be somebody who is going to be a riser in the upcoming rankings. I mean, he was just playing in the Under Armour All-American game, which is obviously a big deal, and he had an interception in that game. And this guy, who's a very good athlete, has very good size. He comes from lineage of, you know, football family, I guess you would say. His dad played at Kansas State. And by the way, that adds a little bit more intrigue to all this, that his dad did play at Kansas State and that he is from Manhattan High School, that you were able to snatch a player out of Manhattan High School. And I think that among all of this is as important as anything. Like, I think Dunnigan's going to be a fantastic player for KU when they're able to land him. And like I said, like maybe he ends up being one of the top, you know, a few players in the state of Kansas. And that in itself is very important for Kansas, who continues to try to build inroads on, you know, creating this pipeline in the state of Kansas, because for so long it has been Kansas State. And, they've gotten their some key players from in-state, whether it's Devin Neal, whether it's Calvin Clements, right? They've been able to get some players there, but Kansas State has still gotten the majority of them. But obviously it was going to be a long process for KU because for so many years, a lot of these players who are committing now grew up on Kansas not being good at football. And so you get that ingrained in your mind. But they're starting to turn that around. They're starting to, land more in-state guys. And that is why this is even more important. And the class of 2026 for the state of Kansas figures to be a pretty good one. So you add to it then that he took Kansas over there was, a bunch of other schools that offered him, obviously, but it sounded like Nebraska, Kansas State, Kansas were the main three that were involved here. And from the Nebraska perspective, like they have Big Ten money, they're offering big NIL packages. So the fact that you get, Kansas over Nebraska, that's a big deal on its own. Plus, they're nearby as well. From the Kansas State one, you have the family side of things. You have the fact that he's there local. I mean, it's a big deal to go grab somebody from Manhattan High School. And it's something that we've seen Kansas State be able to do successfully, and not just successfully, but get really good players from the Lawrence area by being able to do that. Like they went into Lawrence High and got Echo Boy-Doe. And I don't know the full process there or what happened from the Kansas perspective. Like, did they even give him a shot? I don't know. But he ended up being a player who's like, kind of been a journeyman NFL guy so far in the course of his career. I don't remember if he was drafted or not, but he's like stuck on rosters or practice squads and stuff. They were able to get that from Lawrence High School, where your college is. Like that's something you cannot allow to happen, right? You think of some offensive linemen from Free State that have gone over to Kansas State and had great careers. You can't afford for that stuff to happen if you're KU. And on the flip side, for you to be able to go into Manhattan and get one back just makes it a little bit more sweet to a certain standpoint. Here's the scouting report for Dunnigan on 24/7 Sports from Andrew Ibbins. Just going to kind of, paraphrase some of this stuff or skip stuff. Checked out the full part of it on his 24/7 profile, but he is a defensive back with developmental upside, length speed combo. He has really dynamic turns, quick-footed wide receivers. He's allowed to hang with those guys. Made a lot of plays in a variety of different ways, so should be able to, flex whether it's an outside corner or safety, and projects as a multi-year starter that will likely need some seasoning before he's ready to go on Saturday. So I think this kid's going to be an impact defender down the road, and you look at the stats of Manhattan, who was the 6A runner-up and nearly was the 6A champion this year, lost a close one to Gardner. In a back-and-forth game, he had 65 tackles, 6 pass breakups, 3 interceptions, also had 2 forced fumbles, and then he had 28 catches for 556 yards, so 20 yards a catch, basically. 5 touchdowns. He had 2 kickoff return touchdowns and a punt return touchdown. So this guy's dynamic with the ball in his hand, and he, like I said, had an interception in the Under Armour All-American game. But class of 2026, so that would mean that he is, a junior in high school right now? So he'd be a senior in high school this upcoming year, or this upcoming fall, so to speak, and then he would join the team in 2026. Now, as far as how he impacts the roster come 2026, assuming you keep his commitment, that is one part of this. Like, whenever you're talking about class of 2026 recruits, like you still have to keep recruiting those players. You have to still do well as a program and, fend off. It always is re-recruiting guys over the course of the year, right? But at safety, Jalen and Devin Dye graduate after 2025, so that would be, 2 players gone. Though if they do get another year, both of them, because of the JUCO thing, you actually could have every safety in 2026 back from 2025 if you're Kansas. But then at the very least in 2027, which would be the time that Dunnigan would be a second-year player, so either redshirt freshman or a true sophomore, you'd be for sure losing both Dye brothers. You'd be losing Lyric Rawls. You'd be losing Mason Ellis. And then you'd have probably a redshirt senior in Taylor Davis. So you'd be looking at that crop of young safeties with Dunnigan, with Damani Maxson, and some of these guys is competing to be your second starter next to Davis. And then come 2028, it'd be completely open for who's going to be, the 2 starters. And obviously there are really 3 safeties who are playing starting level snaps in how Kansas runs their defense. So I think there's a real chance you could see Dunnigan playing a real role for Kansas as soon as his second year in the program. And I mean, if he's that good of a recruit, then he'll get on the field in year one in same ways that we've seen players like, Jalen Todd. It just might be more, hey, we're going to preserve your red shirt, but then you're going to really play over the last 4 games or something like that. Now, as far as the offensive side of the ball, receiver, I'd view him more as a rotational package receiver, with the main position being as a DB or a safety. But obviously, they have brought in 4 freshmen in 2025. They still have a lot of portal seniors coming in on this year's team. So there should be playing time opportunities at the position for him as well, as long as that ends up being something that does carry over into things. Now, from a class of 2026 perspective, what this means, Dunnigan joins 2 other commits. There is 3-star corner Lenny Brown. There's 3-star quarterback Jalen Mason. And that also means that 2 of your 3 recruits are in-state kids, with Mason and Dunnigan. And from Mason's perspective, you're going down to the Wichita area, with Dunnigan again from Manhattan. So Mason's still unrated so far in the class. That'll come in eventually, but that gives Kansas an 88 graded player with Dunnigan. And again, that might even go up, and an 86 graded player with Lenny Brown, according to 24/7. So continuing to fill the future class while they also work on things in the portal. Let's talk more about the portal, though, recapping what they've added so far. This is Locked On Jayhawks. And our episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. You might remember the excitement of past playoff games and can't wait to make new memories with the updated format and extra teams involved. Well, with Game Time, you can get cheaper tickets, or not necessarily even cheaper tickets, but it's just an easier way to go about it. And they do have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. Filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. But they do have their, a lot of guarantees about if you can find the same price in the same row and section for less, they will give you back credit. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, continuing on, thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget you can check out Locked On College Football, Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. Recapping what KU football has added in the transfer portal to this point in time. So let's start with the offensive side of the ball. Leshon Williams comes into the program. He was your, first one of the offseason, but really second one you added, because in season you added Bengali Kamara, but we'll get to that on the defensive one. But Leshon Williams, running back from Iowa, figures to kind of contend to be one of your top running backs on this year's team. Then you look at Keon Burnett. He comes in at tight end from Arizona, former 4-star recruit, 89 graded transfer on 24/7. He figures to come in and compete for your starting tight end position. So you look at it too, and then you look at the receiver positions. Emmanuel Henderson, the transfer from Alabama, Bryson Canty, the transfer from Columbia, Levi Wentz, the transfer from Albany, Cam Pickett, the transfer from Ball State. I think you kind of figure that one of those guys will probably compete to be KU's receiver 1. If I was putting money on it, the ceiling of Emmanuel Henderson would make you pick that Henderson would be the most likely, assumption for who's going to be KU's receiver 1. But if it doesn't click, then Bryson Canty might be my actual, next one on the list there. And maybe it is a guy who's returning like Doug Emelian. But point being, as I just went through all those, it's not a guarantee, right? There's still guys like Harry Stewart and, John Thompson and Daniel Highshaw. Sounds like he could be back now. And, that those guys could be your running back 1, or that, like I said, Emelian could be this, or Deshaun Hanukkah could be tight end 1. But the fact that you at least have a chance to get running back 1, tight end 1, receiver 1 out of this portal class, I guess it can go both ways, right? If it's because your current guys on the roster aren't doing very well, that's not a great thing. But I view it more from a positive light of like, you've gotten starting level players, and that is a very important thing to have, and players who could be playing big roles on the team. And even if, those things don't happen, let's say Hanukkah is tight end 1, Keon Burnett's still going to play a lot as tight end 2. KU plays a lot of 2 and sometimes even 3 tight end sets. Like if Daniel Highshaw is your running back 1, Leshon Williams is still going to get a lot of carries. KU uses 2 running backs, right? The receiver position. Let's say Emmanuel Henderson's not receiver 1, but he's receiver 2. You're still going to get a lot of targets and stuff. Then you look at the offensive line, and this isn't as much of, seeing guys who I think are going to factor into the starting lineup right away. Now, I do think Tavaki Tuikolovatu, the transfer from UCLA, he very well might end up being a starter. I think Tyler Mercer, the transfer from North Texas, he might very well end up being a starter. I think you look at it and both of them are going to be competing for a starting spot. Maybe one of them ends up being a starter, the other ends up on a 2 deep. With Jack Tanner and DeAndre Harper, yeah, maybe either or both ends up on the 2 deep. I don't know that I would expect either one to start, but they're both future long-term players, guys that you're going to get 3 more seasons out of, right? And maybe even 4 if you end up redshirting one or both of those players. So while you got more, I think, impact ready-made players at the skill position so far, on the offensive line, I think it's been more about building for the future, while also at the very least adding depth for this year's team. And you look at it, and I think that does make a little bit of sense, right? I mean, obviously from the skill positions, you're surrounding a veteran quarterback with Jalen Daniels who needs those good skill positions. And you look at the offensive line, and yeah, there's still going to be some questions about it, but at the very least, you have Bryce Foster, Kobe Baines back. You have Calvin Clemens back, who is going to be a third-year player who hasn't started a ton of games, that has started some games to where you feel confident about what he'll be doing in year 3. So it does make sense to be like, hey, you're losing all these receivers and you're losing this and that, add some ready-made players for there. But then on the offensive line, where especially continuity is so important, it makes a lot of sense to add guys with multiple years. But so that's what they've done on the offensive side of the football. Could you go through and say, like, if we're talking about where do those players rank compared to the players they're replacing, Leshon Williams is not going to be an upgrade over Devin Neal. I'm sorry, he's just not. Keon Burnett could be an upgrade if he hits his ceiling over what KU had at tight end this season. But also Jared Casey was first team All Big 12 as a fullback. I think they're just different players. Burnett is more of a just, true tight end and can be a receiving tight end. If Emmanuel Henderson hits as a former, top 60 recruit nationally, then maybe his ceiling is higher than any receiver KU even had. But I think overall you'd probably say, you're not necessarily getting better from some of your receivers. Like is Levi Wentz going to be better than Luke Grimm? I don't know. Remains to be seen. But like stuff like that, we'll see. And then in the offensive line, like the players you graduate, really good players. Like Logan Brown's going pro for a reason. Is DeAndre Harper going to be better than him in 2025? No, probably not. So I think it'll be interesting to see. But I think you could also make the case that if you are making those comparisons, well, one, you're hoping for internal player improvement to overcome some of those improvements. But also, two, that realistically, Kansas was closer to probably being like a 7-8 win team this season when you look at their resume and how many close losses they had. And so if you view it from that perspective of like, okay, if they were really closer to being like they should have been an 8-win team, even if they're worse than they are, next year, maybe you view it as okay, but they'll be luckier in 1-score games and they can still find a way to get to 6 wins and bowl eligibility. But who knows? Maybe some of these transfers end up being even better than you expect, and you have a lot of internal improvement. But let's talk about the defensive side of the ball next. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. You can get in on futures, who's going to win the Super Bowl, who's going to win the national championship, because we got a lot of great football coming at you this week. I mean, you get the college football playoffs on Thursday and Friday. You got NFL wildcard action on Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So you're about to be loaded with football, and you can get in on that action with FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. Finishing things up with this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, and we will have a Kansas-Arizona State preview coming at you on tomorrow's show to get you ready for that one on Wednesday night. We'll recap that game and also get you ready for the Cincinnati game, give you a preview and recap for that one coming up this weekend, as well as we stop into a little KU football here. Okay, so recapping KU's defensive additions on the transfer portal so far. So we started in the defensive line where Gage Keys coming back, returning to Lawrence, and I think that's a nice addition. I like what KU's defense tackle room already looked like. I like it even better with Gage Keys back in the fold. I know didn't really get much playing time with Auburn, but a different level on the line of scrimmage in the SEC. And I think KU probably utilizes him a little bit better. And I think there was a little bit of, you saw it over the season, like Gage Keys kind of regretted the decision. You could see, I mean, I never blamed him for doing it, because if you get a bag to go, like, and you're not somebody who's seen as this like third round draft pick, first round draft pick into the NFL, like, go change your life, go change your family's life, make some money. But I think that's a nice addition back for KU. You look at the more edge position, Caleb Redd comes in, transfer from Kentucky, and he's someone who's a former highly recruited guy from the Missouri area nearby. Obviously ends up at an SEC school as well. Was playing more linebacker for Kentucky, but outside linebacker, probably transfers over to be a defensive end at Kansas. And he kind of joins a list of young players, defensive ends for Kansas that are formerly highly recruited guys like Bai Jobe and Dak Brinkley, who can they break out? Can you get at least one breakout? Dylan Brooks would apply to this too, right? Can you get at least one or two breakouts from that group this season to really hammer home that position? Then you look at the linebacker position. KU has added two so far. Bengali Kamara, he was your in-season ad, transferred from South Carolina before that Pitt, and Joseph Sipp Jr., really productive player at Bowling Green. This was an area of importance for KU to add portal players. One, because the linebacker group struggled last year. Now, I do think J.B. Brown had a really good year for KU as the linebacker position. He was more of a see and hit you linebacker than a cover linebacker, but he still had overall a good season. I think Cornell Wheeler was having a good season, and then he had the injury, and then after trying to come back from the injury, you saw, like, for instance, the PFF grades really drop off, and I think that was unfortunate in what it did for his season, because, like I said, the first 4 or 5 games, he was doing really well, and then the West Virginia injury, and then things didn't really end well from there. Berry Hill really struggled. In the end, KU ended up with, I think, 2 of the bottom 3 or 4 linebackers in the Big 12 by PFF grade. So you're looking to get this position better, but you're also losing players who were starting level for you. So, like, that's not a good place to be. The fact that you added 2 productive transfers over the course of their career, huge hits in the transfer portal. We'll see if they can add anything else there. Then you look at the DB room, and this is where maybe KU did their most work overall besides receiver. If we're talking defensive side, I think in terms of clearly quantity, this is where they did their most work, but I think you can make the case that by quality, this is where they did the most work. Maybe you could say a linebacker, but I don't know, man. If you're just counting the DBs as a whole, like Jaleel Hurley for Alabama, again, kind of guy like Emmanuel Henderson, hasn't been on the field like a bunch, but former really highly recruited guy that if you can get the most out of, that's a huge hit for you at corner. DJ Graham, meanwhile, is a very experienced guy. He's played at Oklahoma and Utah State, had a really good year at Utah State. So you add a lot at the corner position after losing a couple studs in Mello Dotson and Kobe Bryant. You add Lyric Rawls at safety, who I think is going to have a good year, and he can even have multiple years in the program after coming over from Oklahoma State. Like, that's a good place to be if you're Kansas, adding those 3 players. And I guess if you wanted to tack on Leif Marjon, the transfer kicker from South Alabama, who was nails for the Jaguars last year, coming over to Kansas, like, that would be another good addition for the defense. But I think you look at it overall for Kansas defensively, and it felt like they kind of flatlined a little bit from where they were in 2023 to where they were in 2024 on the defensive end of the football. So, how can you take that next step? How can you get better on the defensive side of the ball? And one beauty for Kansas is, for the first time in the Lance Leipold era, they'll bring back their sack leader in Dean Miller, right? So that'll be a nice place to start. And then you add some of these good transfers. Even though you do lose a lot of linebackers, I think there's an opportunity to be even better there, right? Especially if you can make another addition to that linebacker room. And clearly you had some work to do in the DB room with all the players you lost at DBs. I don't know that the players they've replaced, as good of players as I think they've added there, I don't think you're going to expect them to replace everything you had with Mello and Kobe and Marvin Grant and everything, but can they at least give you enough that maybe you can be better in some other areas, and the new defensive coordinators in there with DK McDonald, that it's enough for the defense to at least take a small step forward this next season? Because if you are looking at it, if we are going back to this idea of, again, the offensive side of the ball, you lost Devin Neal, you lost your 3 starting receivers, and even though you added some solid transfers in, if they're not as good, what if the offense isn't as good next year as it was this past season? Well, then the defense better be better so that you can make an improvement and make a bowl game. And I do think that is possible based on what they've done in the portal. But again, there is still more to possibly come, but that's kind of recapping what's happened so far in the portal for KU football. All right, we'll be back tomorrow to talk a little Kansas, Arizona State. Should be an interesting one in the Fieldhouse. Last time Arizona State was there, Remy Martin happened, and not the good Remy Martin for Kansas in the NCAA tournament in 2022. It was bad for KU at the time. But we'll discuss all that and break down that game on tomorrow's episode. So make sure to subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. See you then.